but joined by Dan Hope, 11 Warriors. Dan, thanks for your time with Paul Craig, and I'm David Smoak. What kind of weekend did the Buckeyes have?
Yeah, certainly a very busy one. I mean, it's been a busy, very few weeks for the Ohio State football team in terms of adding transfers, bringing players back who could have entered the NFL draft. There's been, a lot of good news on that front for Ohio State as they try to, really build up their roster for the 2024 season.
So, Dan, where does their quarterback room stand now? I know that everybody's going to be there and competing as it looks right now, but bringing in Julian Sayin, does that send a message to Aaron Nolan and Lincoln Kleinholtz in particular?
Yeah, I don't know that sending a message is the right way to put it. I think what it really is Ohio State got a second chance to land the quarterback who was ranked as the number one quarterback in the class of 2024, and they said they couldn't pass that up. I think when Julian Sayin entered the transfer portal, he did so wanting to play for Ohio State. Ohio State was his second choice during his high school recruitment. And so I think, once he entered the portal, he quickly reached out to Ohio State and expressed interest in playing there. And I think Ohio State ultimately determined that, he was too good to pass up a chance to get.
So, there's this discussion about how much are they committed to NIL, transfer portal, high school, and that's fine. It's the way America is today in college football. Was there a change in philosophy or just more of a renewed effort?
I think probably more of a latter, but maybe a little bit of both. I mean, I think when Ohio State, when NIL first started in 2021, the first year or two, Ohio State was definitely a little bit hesitant to dip its toe in the water the way, maybe a school like a Texas A&M did or some of the other programs in the South. I think Ohio State definitely took a more cautious approach early on. Early on they were, very leery of, NCAA violations and, didn't really want to be seen as being involved at all in terms of directly helping players get NIL deals. And I think, they've realized, over the past few years that, NIL is not going anywhere. It's only getting bigger. And if, we want to win national championships, we have to be very aggressive in this area. And so I think you've certainly seen, I think with every year, I think their stance on that has evolved a little bit more. And I think certainly over the past couple months, they've taken it to another level in terms of, their aggressiveness in that regard.
Did Michigan winning the national title throw any extra logs on that fire, like as far as maybe accelerating the plan a little bit more?
Yeah, I think it absolutely did. I think that to see your rival have that kind of success, to lose to your rival 3 years in a row, it sends a message that, Ohio State needs to do more if it wants to be the team winning the national championship. And so I think, without a doubt, I think that played a part in the renewed effort for, accelerating the NIL efforts. And I think a lot of it, too, is I think Ryan Day understands the situation here. 3 years in a row, Ohio State always says its major goals are to beat Michigan, win the Big Ten, win the national championship. Ohio State has not achieved any of those goals since 2020. And so I think Ryan Day knows, he might not have a job a year from now if they don't achieve those goals this year. And so I think that certainly leads to an increased sense of urgency as well.
So, Dan, immediately when Julian Sayin committed, as I'm sure you saw, was all right, where's Aaron Nolan going? And, what about the rest of the quarterback room? I know that there's already been some talk about that and reaffirming his future and all those types of things. But what do you think that the last few days of action mean for that quarterback room moving forward, outside of Will Howard's the guy for right now, and then the rest can be sorted out later?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, certainly the simple answer. I think, realistically, does anyone at Ohio State expect that all five quarterbacks on the roster now are still going to be there in September? I think the answer to that would be no. I think they would expect there to be some attrition from that room. I think the goal is certainly going to be to limit that attrition. I think, Ohio State, if one of those guys leaves, not a big deal. 4 is usually their target number anyway. If 3 guys leave, well, then you have a little bit of a problem in terms of your depth at quarterback. So I think managing that situation is certainly going to be an important job for Ryan Day. And Bill O'Brien is the new offensive coordinator and quarterback coach. I think, managing that situation, I'm going to be very interested to see whenever we do get opportunities to watch them practice this spring, just how are they going to manage those reps at that position? Because like you said, Will Howard is going to be the guy this year if everything goes according to plan. You certainly expect he's going to be the guy taking most of the first team reps this offseason. But then, you go into spring, you have 4 other guys, and you have to kind of manage, those guys' reps. It's going to be very interesting to see how Ohio State decides to approach that.
What about Brian Hartline and his role? He's a great recruiter, hell of a coach, but because of the Bill O'Brien hire, is that any kind of a step back for him?
Maybe a little bit, but I think the thing that, would be important to clarify there is Brian Hartline was not calling the plays last year, even got that promotion to offensive coordinator. And so I think realistically, the promotion for Brian Hartline last year, it was more of giving him a bigger title and giving him a big raise to keep him on staff because he's such a good recruiter, because he's such a good receivers coach. I think, there was some conversation last year about the possibility of him calling plays, of him being more of a true offensive coordinator. But ultimately, Ryan Day didn't become comfortable with doing that. And so, I think that ultimately precipitated the move to, bring in an actual offensive coordinator to call the plays, take that off of Ryan Day's plate. And in turn, Brian Hartline is now, co-offensive coordinator instead of offensive coordinator. But, he's certainly someone who's still going to have a lot of influence on that staff. He's certainly somebody who's still valued very highly by the staff as a recruiter and as a receivers coach. But, a little bit of a step back in terms of, maybe his climb up the ladder as a coach to where, he's no longer that top assistant on the offensive staff.
What was the Bill O'Brien hire met with in Columbus?
Definitely mixed reaction. I think there's people who view it as a home run. You got a guy who's a former NFL head coach who has a ton of experience both in the NFL and in college as both a head coach and an offensive coordinator and as a quarterback coach. And then there's other people who are like, well, the Patriots had the worst offense in the NFL last year. There were mixed reviews of his time at Alabama. And so I think it's definitely been a mixed reaction among Ohio State fans in terms of this hire. But, you look at the resume, there's not a lot of other people they could have hired who check as many boxes as he does in terms of, his experience at both the NFL and collegiate levels. And I think that ultimately led to Ohio State's decision to hire him.
Paul brought up earlier about the pressure with Michigan, Harbaugh, what they've done 3 years in a row. And, of course, that enough is enough to make Ohio State fans explode and the players and coaches. Where is Ryan Day mentally right now and how he's going to handle the next few months going forward?
Yeah, I think he certainly understands, the pressure that's on him this year to beat Michigan and, for Ohio State to, take a step forward from where it's been the last few years. But, I think certainly if you're an Ohio State fan, you like seeing the way this offseason has started. You like seeing the way he's responded, where maybe the last couple years, I think there was a perception that maybe Ohio State wasn't being aggressive enough to respond to, losing to Michigan. I think the way they've started this offseason, both in terms of the transfers they've added, some of the coaching staff changes they've made, I think that sent a clear message that Ryan Day feels a sense of urgency. He knows this is a really big year for him and that, there is that pressure in Columbus for Ohio State to get back on top of that rivalry. And I think the way that they've approached this offseason so far speaks to that.
So with the new Big Ten, and God knows it's hard to keep up with all these teams, but we know who's coming in, and they're pretty good. What are the expectations of how all this works? What would be your Power Five right now with Oregon and obviously Washington, USC, and UCLA joining the mix of what normally is Ohio State, Penn State, obviously Michigan, and maybe one or two others?
Yeah, I think of the 4 teams coming in, I view Oregon as the biggest threat for next season to, come in and compete for the Big Ten championship right away. Obviously, Washington's got some major turnover right now after losing Kalen Moore. USC, they've got to get their defense fixed, and they're not going to have Caleb Williams next season. UCLA, is a team that I think, they're going to kind of fit somewhere into that middle tier of the Big Ten. I think, based on, what they've been able to do in the Pac-12. But, when I look to next season, I mean, that's from Ohio State's perspective in terms of who their top competition is going to be in the conference. I think it could very well be Oregon. Michigan is losing a lot. We still don't know if Jim Harbaugh is going to be Michigan's coach next year. Penn State's got a lot of returning talent, but they haven't shown that they can get over that hump and win those big games over Ohio State and Michigan. And so I look at Oregon, especially with Ohio State having to go on the road to play Oregon and Eugene this year, as potentially Ohio State's biggest competition for the Big Ten title.
Dan, thank you very much, as always. Really big weekend for Ohio State, and the transfer portal plus Julie with Sayin, the Alabama decommit to then goes to Ohio State. What a room that's going to be. And thanks for the time, Dan. Hope 11 Warriors on Ohio State in what they've done. A lot more.